Part 8. Hope and resilience. In 2004, I began my doctoral research in the capital city of El Salvador by interviewing people who were caught by the late 20th century civil war in that country that involved the government, the military, the church, the working class, peasants, everyone in the country. Over the course of 3 years, I learned about hope and resilience by interviewing people in that country. I learned that in a specific place in 1972, a group of 500 families met secretly in an attempt to establish housing for themselves in the midst of the war. The fighting had pushed people into the city from the mountainside and countryside, and in the city there was just not enough employment, and the housing costs were astronomical. So the families organized and planned to band together on April 22nd, 1972, and to claim the city dump as their home, a place they called the 22nd of April Colony. They thwarted the powers that be and stood together when there was any attempt to remove someone from the new encampment or an attempt to stop their construction of homes, waterways, and power. That resistance caused great suffering because they were constantly at odds with the authorities. But that resistance, that standing together, fueled their resilience. The core members of the community still live there today and affirm that the months and years of difficulty keeping their group safe and fed and sheltered made them stronger people. Even in the years after the Civil War, the resilience of the group sustained them through earthquakes and mudslides, and now today gang violence and protracted poverty. Some of them have resilience against the repeated hardships because they hope for a future with a sense of really sustaining the status quo. They trust that things aren't going to get worse and that they will carry on just as they have before. There are others in that colony who have resilience against the difficulties because their hope for the future is characterized by moving ahead. Their resilience is fortified by every action to change their current reality together. So whether maintaining this line in the sand or pushing the boundaries forward, together everyone in the colony defied the powers of the oligarchy and the military and found a way to stand strong and sustain hope. Now, I'm not sure if it would be accurate to say that the group as a whole was suffering for its faith through all of those years. But there were individuals for whom that was true. The group's members were Catholic, evangelical, Pentecostal, agnostic, and atheist. Now, it may well be that the impetus for some to transform society came from the roots of the Christian gospel message that declares the oppressed will be loosed and the captives set free. It may well be that for some, the source of abiding strength to maintain life as is came from the belief that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Whether hoping for the status quo or for dramatic change, the people in this colony developed resilience in the face of suffering. The first letter of Peter to the early Christians was an account of advice given to them on the occasion of their trials and sufferings at the hands of the Romans. They were suffering in part because they believed Jesus Christ was Lord, not Caesar. They were suffering ultimately not because of what they believed, but because of what they did. And this letter of 1 Peter was an encouragement to them to continue doing what it was that they were doing. They were preaching liberation. They rejected conformity with the existing structures, and that defiance was threatening to the Romans. The first century Christians refused to be beaten down and separated from each other. They sought strength from being together, sharing food and shelter, and promoting a flat organizational structure rather than a top-down hierarchy. The community was together, in pain, rejected, maligned, but together. 1 Peter gave examples of ways to build resilience in the context of imperial harassment and physical brutality. With the image of a lion in 1 Peter, we have predicted the kind of predator the Christians feared, one with teeth, stealth, cunning, and brute strength, the Roman guard. Gordon McClellan, a pastor in Oregon, reflects on the passage that refers to the devil that comes like a lion. He says, with regard to this particular text, it helps to note that perhaps the greatest form of violence that the devil can render is to separate people from one another. That is, for people to forget or abandon this notion of our connectionality, of being united with all around the world in our struggles, triumphs, joys, and fears. So to forget would be to sever the most important tie that binds people of faith together in the commitment to love one another as Christ loved. Those are the words of Gordon McClellan. For this reason, I think that humankind is feeling threatened around the world in our day and time. The coronavirus has stealth, it has camouflage, it has cunning, and it can fell a human of any size without any external evidence. We are prey to a predator that we cannot see, and the way through is actually to choose to be separated from each other. But togetherness is the key to our resilience. So we're in a moment of disconnect. We're created and wired to connect with each other through facial recognition, attachment, and the benefit of physical touch. But still, it's in our solitude that we are able to resonate ever so slightly with those who have suffered for endless years. In our solitude, in our need, our eyes are opened to the abyss of loss and hurt across the world. In suffering of any kind, there is clarity about the nature of our mortal frailty. This draws us closer together spiritually, whether we are in physical proximity to each other or not. These moments of shared despairing spark our natural empathy and trigger a reminder that truly we are not alone. These moments of collegial suffering awaken us to the common experience that makes us all the more resilient. This is what 1 Peter is trying to get across. When we share in the kind of suffering that Jesus experienced, we are awakened to the wider human experience of pain and the promise of glory to come. The promise of resurrection at the end of the struggle, whether that means release at the end of a short-term difficulty or God's vindication of good over evil in the fullness of time, the promise of glory becomes our beacon of hope. It becomes a light that guides us to the other side of turmoil. All of this as a whole draws us closer to Christ, who suffered even though he was innocent, who carried the weight of sin and fear, and who loved even his enemies through it all. This closeness with Christ, being together with Christ, gives us the kind of resilience we need to hold the suffering of the world. Yes, we are stronger and more resilient when we are together, but when we are separated, we find that we rely on the strength of Christ, who not only understands our frailty, but who conquered death. When we choose Christ at the center of our lives, then we're able to identify where Christ is in the midst of suffering and separation. The Episcopal theologian A.K.M. Adams, who used to teach at Seabury Seminary here in Evanston, wrote this: "First Peter articulates the hope of future glory as a point of orientation for daily life." Future glory as an orientation for daily life. The glory serves as a beacon toward which we should orient our lives and by which we can see more clearly the conditions in which we find ourselves. Without the orientation toward Christ, the morning star who knows no setting, we falter and stray into futile ways. Our resilience, friends, our hope, is predicated on our ability to come together in our greatest difficulties. It is there that we will find the light and the hope of Christ. It is there that we will find each other. Amen.